Hello and welcome. Yeah, this week we're headed to Texas for our 11th week on this 50 States ZenQuiltz journey. I appreciate you so much for joining me, whether it be for just 1 week or all 50 or somewhere in between. Just know I appreciate you for being on this adventure with me. Yeah. So go ahead and offer yourself gratitude and appreciation for allowing yourself this creative time. And thank you so much for joining me. Here is a visual of our tools that we'll be using today that matches the list on the supply that you previously saw. I'm going to go ahead and push everything off to the side and grab my tile and my ruler and pencil, and we're going to start adding the string to this tile. So once again, if you've been here before, I'm going to add a 3/16 inch border or frame around each edge of this tile. So just adding some hash marks at 3/16 of an inch that we're going to go ahead and connect to create the frame or the outer border of this quilt block, so that when we're all done, we have some kind of consistency to each tile, and it allows us to have a space to connect all of them together if we're going to do that. Otherwise, you have a frame for one single quilt to use as a container for where we're about to head. Okay, so now that we have our border created, we're going to go ahead and find the center of this inner portion of our block. So that's 1.5 plus 1 line, or 9/16. So that's going to be our center line. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my tile so that I can grab that hash mark and create a line right through the center of that open space, keeping my border free of that center line. And again, finding the center 1 and 9/16 on the opposite side and adding that center plus sign to that block. Okay, so now that we have this plus sign in the center of our working space, we're going to use this bottom or this center line, and we're going to add a hash 7/8 to the left of that line and 7/8 to the right of that line. So using our center as our guideline, we're adding 7/8 to the left and 7/8 to the right. I'm going to turn my tile and I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other side of that vertical center line. So now that I have 7/8 on either side of this vertical center line, I'm going to go to the horizontal line and I'm going to add 5/8 of a hash to that. So 5/8 from my now center line, adding another hash mark. Turning your tile, doing the same thing on the other side. Okay. So now we have hash marks at 7/8 from our vertical and 5/8 from our horizontal line. And we're going to go ahead and connect both of those hash marks together to create this triangular space in each corner. So now that we have these triangular corners on our tile, we're going to go ahead and measure halfway on each one of these boxes. So halfway is going to get us to 12.5 lines, or the space after 3/4. Okay, it's going to land right on that line. So I'm going to pull it down, pull my ruler down just far enough so that that hash mark lands right here on my line. I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my tile so that I have access to that diagonal line when I lay my hash line at that 12.5 space line, or the space right after 3/4. So I'm always going to start at the short side of my triangle so that I can lay that hash mark onto that diagonal line. Turning my tile so that I always have, again, that hash mark that lands close to or on my diagonal line. Okay, so here I have my 12.5 line hash mark. So now that I have these hash marks on my diagonal line, I'm going to use those hash marks to measure 1 inch into that block. So that's why I wanted you to add that hash kind of right on or close to our diagonal line, because we really want that hash or our measurement to come from the diagonal line. So using that line and that hash, I'm going to add another hash or dot at 1 inch. I'm going to do that all the way around. Again, using that hash mark or that line to measure 1 inch from that diagonal line. Okay, so now that we have these 4 dots in the center of our space, we want to make sure that our tile is such that our 7/8 spaces on this vertical line are up and down. Okay, so make sure that your 7/8 space is what is facing up and down. Then, when you're sure of that, you want to go to that horizontal line and add a little hash at 7/8 right on that line. All right, here's where the fun begins. We're going to connect these dots. So here's our 1 inch dot, yeah, and we're going to connect that to the top of our vertical center. Okay. And we're going to continue to go around connecting dots and hashes So now that I have my first peak, I want to go out to this hash mark that we laid on that diagonal line. So adding that arm out to the outside. Again, coming down to that dot on that horizontal line. Now we're going to reach this hash mark on our diagonal. So you see what's happening here. We're creating the star for our Texas star quilt. Texas being the Lone Star State, right? So it only makes sense that its quilt would have a star on it. Lightly drawing these lines in, connecting one dot to one hash mark at a time. So there we have it, the Texas star right in the center of our quilt. It doesn't mean we're done, but we can see the vision now of where we're headed, yeah? So now we're going to look at the valleys of each one of these points that we created, and we're going to add a hash at the half-inch mark from the valley to our center. So just adding a little dot or hash at the half-inch from our valley. Lining it up so that that would go into the center if that line continued, or if that so lining that ruler up with the center to add that dot at the half-inch. So once again, being mindful that your tile is positioned with the 7/8 space at the top and bottom. So your 7/8 space is up and down. We want to add a little dot at a half-inch on each side on that horizontal line. Okay. So we should have 4 dots underneath each valley, and then 2 dots underneath the valleys of the horizontal line that crosses. All right. Now you can take your ruler or you can just draw these across, but we're now going to connect those dots. Forming a small little hexagon right in the center of this star. So once we have this center hexagon laid out, we're going to connect peak of the hexagon to valley of the point of peak above. So just connecting peak to valley. Connecting those dots, creating these kind of diamond shape expressions all the way around this Texas star. So now that we're all strung up, I'm going to go ahead and erase the lines within that star, just because we don't need them anymore, and I don't want it to affect my coloring as we go through this. So I just want to kind of clean up those internal lines that we used for our string. And after I have those center lines erased, I'm going to go ahead and just grab my kneaded eraser, kind of work that a little bit, warm it up. And then I'm just going to, once again, just dab some of the depth of those string lines away so that they're not so prominent that they're not able to kind of disappear into the background of what it is we do when we go to our color options. So of course we don't want to take the whole thing away because we drew it for a reason, but I just don't want it to hinder where we're headed. All right. So there we have it, our Texas Star quilt. We're going to offer our coloring a little bit differently. I've been getting a lot of comments or emails about having fun exploring different ways to use tombos that people may or may not have already done. So I thought, why not just go ahead and explore our color potentials as well as we're working this process? So I do have my acetate and I do have my blender, but I also want to offer a new technique. So with that said, wanting to offer a new approach to our color, I'm going to grab my 991 to begin. So we know that the Texas flag is red, white, and blue, but you also may by now know that I'm afraid of the white space. So instead of keeping things white, I'm going to offer this neutral that I've kind of pulled from the beginning as my neutral to white. So this 991, I'm just going to go ahead and outline that center hexagon, making sure that my blender is clean. I'm now going to take, I guess my blender wasn't really clean. I'm going to take this palette that I've just laid and I'm going to circular motion over top of that palette. And I'm going to blend that in to the center. So we're going to get this immediate automatic depth or shading along the outside of this hexagon. That kind of melts away to a highlight on the center of that hexagon. So we like to, or I have been, asking you to emphasize the edges of our spaces with our colored pencil. Well, you may find this week that you may not want to do that process, but we'll see where this goes. So blending that 991 softly into that center, we have again that texture that we're looking for to add our tangles on top. You'll see that I'm kind of wiping or trying to wipe some of those red pills away that formed because I didn't clean up my blender. Do as I say, don't do as I do, right? Anyway, I'm going to go to my 856 now, and this 856, one point of that star at a time, I'm going to go ahead and outline that space. Now, I say one point at a time because we want this ink to remain wet so that we can, in fact, blend it and move it. So I'm going to go right over that palette. And you see how, again, circular motion, I'm able to manipulate that, activate that, soften that, pull it into the center. Now, circular motion, the more you work this, the more you're going to soften that outer edge. It's not going to quite be so predominant. The more you work it and soften that out. And again, it offers that highlight right to the center just by default of how far that ink pulls. So I'm going to do that for each of those peaks, outlining and softening those lines down, pulling that ink into the center of that space. The wetter your blender is, the less you'll have to push and tear at that paper. My blender is seemingly quite dry. See if I can grab another blender that may be a bit wetter. Let's see where this goes. I think it might be. No telling really until the next one. So this technique still offers us that variation, that texture by manipulating and moving that ink. I took a pause and grabbed a new blender that seemingly blenders have gotten a workout during this series. So let's see what the new blender does on the next pedal. And if you don't like this look, by all means, you can go directly to your tile with your marker. You can continue using the acetate that we've been using in previous weeks. For those using colored pencils, maybe a recommendation is to fast forward and do your tangling before your color. So it's not so difficult to work on top of those waxy surfaces, right? Whatever you're using, doesn't matter. Just enjoy the process and allow your creativity to speak. If you want to have a yellow star with the blue center, or, a pink expression for Texas, it's all good. It's just about taking the time, allowing yourself the creative play to explore really been enjoying seeing what people are doing with this series. It's fun to be inspired by someone enough to do your own thing and see where the suggestions take you on your own creative journey. I will say that Texas has the most facts of any state I've done so far, and yet it was the most difficult for me to find tangles to do. If you see, I'm just going to go in, and now that I have a better blender, see if I can't blend some of that ink further into the space. I have a lot of really bright white into some of these points that I'd like to tone down just a little bit, but it's a personal preference, really. Yeah, so for this technique, I really do recommend a new or still very wet blender brush because my pedal that I had my new brushes with didn't pill as much as my dry ones, right? Because I was pushing so hard to manipulate that palette, right? Uh, but all good. I just love how those highlights just pop right off that tile. We have that texture that we looked for with our blending process and using our acetate. So we got it right on our tile. I would, however, recommend a newer blender or at least, a wet enough blender that you're not pushing so hard to manipulate so that you get those pilled spaces. But beautiful. So I'm going to go to my 526 and I'm going to continue using that same technique. So I'm just going to outline that triangle directly with my marker. Laying my palette, creating my palette. And then once again, taking that blender, softening those edges, bringing that ink into the center of that space. Some papers are meant for this technique. There's marker paper out there at Art Source. So we're kind of using what we have with our Fabriano tiles and trying to make this technique work for us. If you're getting frustrated, if your blender is too dry and you're really getting those pills, not really softening the edges the way that you're hoping to, go back to that acetate or just go directly to inking in these spaces. It's all good. I just wanted to kind of offer another option as we go through the last 4/5 of this quilt journey. Just another way to use your tools that you have that you may not have known about. So getting those textures into that space. Those automatic highlights that happen with the blending of that ink. So I have this 847 and I've allowed this center star ink to kind of dry a bit. So now I'm going to go into each petal, and this 847, I'm going to go ahead and put on the left side and the bottom right where it meets that center gold or that yellow space. And I'm going to soften that, kind of offer a little bit of depth or darkness on the left side and the base of each one of those points. This is optional. Everything is optional, right? If something I ask you to do just doesn't speak to you, by all means, let it go. Listen to your creative voice. If something else is speaking to you right now as to what you think should be happening, go for it. If you want to let it be just the way it was, that's fine too. That's the joy of creativity. You can be inspired to take what you want and leave what you don't. And either way, it's all good. So the reason we went to the blue before we did this is if we would have put this dark red shadow right over top of the space that we were working on, it would have all kind of bled together. Instead of us allowing us to control it, it would have kind of gotten away from us. So allowing that base layer to dry allows us to blend and manipulate this color in a different way. And see how that color added depth right to that center, kind of gave that left side a bit of a shadow by default. Yeah. All right. So here we have white diamonds by default of how our Texas star came to be. And originally I left that space white for the red, white, and blue. Totally up to you, of course, how you see that happening. But I opted to go for that light blue, that 451. Actually, I'm going to do my outer border so that maybe you can see what it looks like keeping it white. And then I'll put my blue in and kind of show you where that's headed. All right, so I'm going to do my 991 directly to the paper around that outside. Being very careful of that blue. We don't want to contaminate that yellow and bring green into our mixture. But if you had a little overlap of blue, it's okay. I did as well. You're not gonna see this tile individually when it all gets connected to those other 49 states when we're all done, right? Going over this pretty boldly so that I have saturated color on that border. Again, personal choice. Once I have those edges done, I'm going to once again pick up that tile or that quilt block and wrap that material all the way around. We don't want those deckled edges to have a white voice in our quilt. Our ink represents our fabric or our material, and our material would, of course, wrap all the way around. So we don't want to really give that a voice. And then I'm going to take my 856, and that's that bright red. I'm going to put that right into the corners of my border. So there you can see the white space. If we kept that center white, honestly, I don't mind it as much as I did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 451. I'm going to go direct to half of them, and then you can choose. Do you like the white space? Or do you like the subtle hue of blue that you get from this light blue background, right? You can choose or make it something completely different. All right, I'm going to let it be. All right, so here's a visual of that light blue versus that white background. Whatever speaks to you, that's what you should be doing right now. I'm going to go ahead and complete that vision with that light blue. I will admit that today the white doesn't bother me as much as it did in my practice run. Okay. So there we are, all colored up, our Texas star. And I'm going to go to my light gray again this week. And again, whew, Texas, it has the most state symbols to date on any state that I've done, from a state game to a state dog to a state tallest ship. Like, everything has a label in Texas. But one thing you can't deny is everything in Texas is bigger. So that's where we're going to start. Inside of each one of the points of our star, I'm going to offer the tingle Dillo. Dillo for the small state animal. Yes, there's a small state animal, a large state animal, a state dinosaur. So, yes, the small state animal is the armadillo. In case you're curious, we have a large animal, the longhorn. All right, so here we go, Dillo. And again, everything in Texas is bigger, so I'm going to do one Dillo in each petal. You can do multiple Dillos and pile them up in different layers. So allow your tile to speak to you. Dillo, here we go. Dillo begins with an arch. And I'm going to arch right into that peak. And then I'm going to come back upon itself in that arch and offer a teardrop or almost a flux. And now I'm going to aura that teardrop or flux one time. Now that I have that structure formed, I'm going to alternate auraing that arch line, auraing that teardrop. Aura the arch, aura the teardrop. And you're going to continue to do this step until you can't go anymore. And then once I have that Dillo, so this is Dillo, I'm just going to enhance it a little bit, and I'm going to add a seed inside of that first teardrop and ink that in. And then I'm going to take that first arch and I'm going to aura until I run out of room in that petal. Dillo. Notice that texture, that automatic highlight right in the center, and the depth around the outside of that petal. So I'm going to do that in each one of those petals. Arch, come back upon itself, offering that teardrop or that flux shape, auraing that flux. And I'm going to alternate auraing the arch, auraing the flux. Aura the arch, aura the flux. And I'm going to enhance that original teardrop with just another smaller teardrop inside and inking that in. And then adding those auras to the top of that Dillo just to fill in that space. Enjoying the repetition as we fill in the rest of those points that Texas star. So there's our Dillo. And of course, since Texas is the Lone Star State, we have to get a star in there somewhere. So I'm going to add a star right to the center of this quilt block. And I'm going to use the Tangle Nice. So Nice isn't necessarily a star tangle, but it has the vision of one potentially. And so we're going to roll with it. So I'm going to go ahead and at each one of the peaks of those hexagons or points of those hexagons, I'm going to add a line across from point to point. And now that we have this structure of lines, I'm going to add a V from line to line. So the tip of one line to the tip of the other, adding a V into that space. And now that we have those V's formed, we're going to draw a line from the valley of the V into the center of those lines. And now that we have that star shape, our lone star, I'm going to go ahead and add lines. You can ink that space. I'm going to add lines because what I'm going to do is after I'm done and I'm done inking, I'm going to go back in with my yellow marker, that marker that I've added to the center, and I'm going to use it direct into this space right over top of these dark spaces to add some more depth into that material. Now, knives in its typical form would have lines that connect through the open space in the back. I'm going to ignore that step because I want that star to really be the prominent voice to that tangle. So there is our lone star. All right. The state flower is the blue bonnet. So the blue bonnet is just a dainty little blue um, floral. But we don't stop in Texas at just having a state flower. We have a bluebonnet city. We have a bluebonnet festival. We have a bluebonnet trail. So I think that there were, I want to say 46 different state symbols for the state of Texas. And again, with 46, I believe that's what I counted, state symbols, I really, really struggled to find tangles to go into these spaces. But there was a blue bonnet tangle. So here's where we are. I'm going to offer blue bonnet into these triangular spaces. And I'm going to do half of a blue bonnet around the outside of my diamond. I just called that a triangular space, but I do mean diamond space. So I'm going to do half of my blue bonnet around the outer edge of this diamond. So blue bonnet has these little flux shapes that are very thinly spaced apart. They don't connect, but it's okay if they do. So just these flux shapes as we know them that kind of lay across the border of this diamond. And then once we have that flux shape laid out, it gets a center almost like we've done to that dillo, only it's a bit thinner, more long and slender than short and rounded. So that center defines that space a bit more. Coming right out of the pinch of that flux shape. And then once I have that border completed, I'm going to go ahead and add a sprig of the blue bonnet right in the center of that fabric. So creating those fluxes, leaving just a little bit of space. Mirroring the opposite side. And then once again, adding that center detail to define that blue bonnet. Finding that magic in the repetition. Allowing one petal of bluebonnet to be laid at a time. Being mindful of my breath. Checking in on those shoulders. Doing what I can see using my go behind on the diamonds that are cut off on the side. Putting any thought into where those petals are falling. Staying in that right brain and just allowing your pen to drop and add another petal. Your fabric, right? So is all of your fabric cut perfectly so that your blue bonnet falls the same way each time? Do you change it up and vary the position of how that blue bonnet falls? Do you see a different layout for your blue bonnet than what I'm offering you? Totally fine. Listen to that voice. offers a great texture, dainty texture to the background of this star. This week's inspiration came from the Workbasket 50 State Quilt Blocks workbook. And in that book that I'm using for inspiration, there are material suggestions, like if you should use a dark material or a bold material or, whatever. And many of them are balanced by a dark print, a medium print, and then some form of neutral solid. So again, in keeping with the fact that when we get all of these quilts together, we want some form of cohesiveness to their appearance, knowing that each state is vastly different with the approach and the patterns, the colors. But we want some kind of common denominator, right? So all of the colors from this week have been seen before. We have a couple new Prismacolors on the list, but you may find that if you used the direct palette technique, you may not even be using colored pencils this week. We'll see where that goes in just a bit. But my point to all of that is the commonality, the structure of the colors that we're using to create these quilts, marrying them together, giving them a cohesiveness to each week. Just so enjoying watching this all unfold. All right, so there we have it, all tangled up. I chose to let these blue triangular shapes sit just as they are as my solid color to kind of ground it out, not make it quite so busy. Total personal choice. You're welcome to go ahead and add anything into there. Again, I think 46 different state symbols. We could do a mockingbird as the state bird. The state dish. Is there any chili tangles out there? I never even heard of their state dog, which is a blue lacy. Had to Google that. Never heard of it. Um, yeah. So state ship, state shell, state pepper, state shrub, state herd, state hat, state gem. We have the Texas red grapefruit as the state fruit. So fun. Never had a clue. But of course, we have the Dallas Zoo and Big Bend National Park happening in Texas as well. Big state, lots of things to do. Anyway, onward. I'm moving from my light gray to my dark gray pencil, and here's where the magic happens. Right now, it's just a colored Zia tile. We're going to change this tile into a beautiful quilt block. And by doing that, we need to add some pen stitching. So pen stitching happens around every single shape right along those string lines or those lines that we've defined. And this is our sewing, right? This pen stitching is that thread going up and down through all of those layers of fabric and filling, creating this beautiful pieced together art. Taking your time, being really deliberate and intentional with each one of those pieces of thread that pop up through the material. When you start rushing, you get these tails on your thread that wouldn't happen if you had a needle and thread in your hand, right? So just be deliberate, intentional, allow yourself to let go and enjoy the process. And each shape is going to have a stitch line on either side of that string line, because each one of these, in this case, dillos, are a separate piece of fabric. We are putting them together. We've cut all this fabric out, and now we're sewing it back together in this beautiful artistic vision of our Texas State Quilt Block. Breathe, let go, and enjoy. That already changes the whole vision of this tile, right? We can now see the quilting. We can now see those pieces coming together. To breathe. Drop those shoulders down away from your ears. Unhinge that jaw. Maybe offer yourself a smile. Stitching that border. Again, if you've been on this journey with me, I'm opting to not sew my outer edge of that border. Again, just because I'm kind of uncertain as to what will happen to the connection of these tiles. I haven't gotten that far yet. So I just want to keep my options open for the edges of those tiles. But this border still needs to be sewn around our block. So you got to stitch all the way around that border as well. It's amazing the change and the personality that happens with the stitching of these blocks, right? Because now it's a quilt block. It's no longer just a Zia tile. Now, when I did that nise in the center, I mentioned that I was going to go back directly with my yellow marker. So I'm going to grab that 991 and I'm going to go right to the side where I've offered that ink. And I'm going to emphasize that fabric with my 991 directly, just giving a bit of depth to the left side of each one of those star points, seeing that fold down the center. Yeah, that's a personal choice. Again, certainly not necessary to have a beautiful visual, right? It was fine just the same. All right. Okay, so here we are at our shading. And this journey, I'm choosing to shade with our similar colored pencils, not graphite, and not just a gray colored pencil. I'm using similar colors to what I've already laid down, to add a shade, but not offset it. I just want it to become more of a shadow where those puckers happen on our stitching. So I'm going to start with my 1034 right into the center, and in a circular motion right on the outside of that patch, I'm going to offer some depth. Now, unfortunately, my stitch line fell on the bleed of my red, which is fine, but you're not going to necessarily really see that pucker so great in this section as you will in the sections to come. So 924 is that red that I'm going to use inside of each one of the star points. Circular motion right up against that stitch line. And again, because of the technique that we used, we already have almost an automatic pucker or shadow at those stitches. I'm adding more, but if you're not noticing a difference, you can call this stage done, right? I think the difference is very subtle. I think we're just adding to that depth that we've already laid. So I'm going to keep going with it. But again, each one of those tiny little tugs of the thread coming in and out slightly puckers that material, that fabric, offering these tiny little shadows in the valleys of where the needle goes down before it comes up, right? So that's what we're enhancing with this technique. Just allowing the center of our poof where that fabric pops up off the base to be highlighted. And again, really emphasize this week with the coloring technique that we used. And then those shadows where those thread thread in and outs happen on the quilt top. I'm going to that 1088, doing exactly the same thing in that light blue bonnet section. And this blue bonnet we did directly to the tile with our ink or with our watercolor or water marker. So this is really being noticed because that marker wasn't laid down in the same fashion as our center was, right? So we're able to see this shadow on those edges a bit more. If you haven't laid out the tiles or blocks that you've completed yet, I've been seeing several posts with those tiles all put together and laid out. And it's quite magical to see where we've been so far. So I recommend just taking the time to piece them together, see how far we've come on this beautiful adventure. I'm going to go to that 906 and into these corners, do the same thing. Circular motion enhancing that depth on the edge of those spaces. Florida put us 1/5 of the way through this project or this adventure. And if you don't know how fast or quickly this year is going, know that we're already 1/5 of the way through the year. Let that sink in. So there we have Texas. Offer yourself gratitude and appreciation for allowing yourself this opportunity to create and share in this experience. Much gratitude to you. I appreciate you. Thank you.